Anyway, look, we all know that tensions are quite high across the country right now. And we saw scenes, we've seen them pretty much popping up all over the place now, haven't we? They continue in the likes of Epping, in places like Waterlooville. We covered Waterlooville a little while ago. That was the place that had such a deserted high street where it had empty shops galore. Well, of course, you'll be familiar with that story. They were planning then to actually put asylum seekers, illegal migrants up into properties there. Locals were having absolutely none of it, taking to the streets. Suella Braverman actually took to Twitter as well, and she was praising people essentially for taking to the streets in a peaceful manner, I have to say, and that does need to be stressed, that anyone that takes to the streets, we do live in a democracy, you're free to protest, but it must always, of course, be done, you know, with as much kind of energy as people want to display. Nothing wrong with that, but it also must be done as peacefully as possible, she says. She was very proud of the people of Waterlooville tonight, to the thousands of locals who peacefully protested. You speak for millions, said Suella. Zero offences, arrests and no disorder. You are not far right. You just love our country and you're willing to stand up for it. So thank you to the Home Office and to the Borough Council. We say no, and thank you, she says, to the police for keeping everybody safe. These protests don't seem to be ending anytime soon, Kelvin.
No, and also I see that the local politicians in Epping have now asked their Home Office to consider shutting down the hotel, which has been the centre of the row so far. I enjoy that idea. I like the idea that local councillors, acting on behalf of the majority, I suspect, of the local residents, are having their voice heard. I like what happened at Waterloo. I agree with Suella. What I don't like seeing happen is seeing people at the front of those demonstrations abusing the police.
No,
it has nothing whatsoever to do with our officers. They are simply standing there. And I do not like that, and I want them to stop it. And they would get a lot more support if they just carried on chanting, but left the police just to stand there. Why you should have to be abused in that manner? If you go down to Waterloo Station or any station, there's signs up there saying abuse is not acceptable. It's not acceptable at railway stations, and it's not acceptable to officers simply standing there trying in some way to maintain order.
No, and also, of course, you do have impartial policing in this country, but at the end of the day, secretly, some of these police officers, they might even agree. They might be local people themselves. They might actually agree that they don't want the hotel in that kind of area any more than some of those protesters do. I mean, obviously, they can't suggest that. But you never really know. It's absolutely ludicrous, this whole notion that attacking frontline police officers, people's mothers, people's fathers, absolutely appalling. Jo, your thoughts?
Well, I completely agree. Peaceful protest is absolutely fine, and we know perfectly well and we understand why people are concerned and why they've got grievances. But, you know, if you compare and contrast the crowds that we saw watching the England women's football team coming back on the Mall, not any element, even, you know, during the final, there weren't chairs being chucked around, there weren't drunks, there weren't punch-ups like you see in the men's football so often and tragically. And if you think, Michelle, that in Southport, in those riots a year ago, 40% of the people who were arrested had got previous either convictions or complaints for domestic abuse. And I think, you know, what we need to do is... I don't think
that was the case just in Southport, is it?
Well, those are the only figures that are relevant in the case of this. But the point being that you will get your voice heard and listened to if you are peaceful and respectful of the police.
Well, let's just take that point. So you take those people at Waterlooville, exclusively white as far as I could see, right? I didn't see everybody there, but they were chanting away and they were peaceful. Does anybody believe that this government is going to do anything about it? They haven't done one single thing since July the 4th last year to stop the very problem which is leading to these riots, to these peaceful protests. So you could be forgiven to think that someday there will be an explosion to say we keep on demanding change. There is no change. We have a Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In fact, doesn't do anything. So who on earth is going to act for these people?
Yeah,
Who speaks for them in Waterlooville?
But the trouble is, Kelvin, you know perfectly well, as I do, and as does Michelle and the viewers, that the people who fill that void are people like Tommy Robinson, who's apparently gone on holiday to Tenerife. They are bad actors, they are bad eggs.
But who is going to act for them?
It's up to the government to come out and tell people what they're doing. And,
the government doesn't need to tell people what they're doing, because anyone that's got working eyesight can see what they're doing. What they are doing is pumping communities against the wishes of the local residents. They are pumping those communities full of largely single, often, mostly, undocumented males, often from communities that we know in this country that some of these guys have a higher propensity to perform things like sexual assaults. So we know what they're doing.
But a lot of those people will have been in those temporary accommodations under the previous government, Michelle. That is part of the problem. I mean,
correct.
You can't just blame it all on Labour.
I definitely do not blame it all on
And a lot of
Labour.
those people have been there, and the problem existed under the previous government.
But the good news is that the public have not forgotten all this, and they're down at 16 and 17% in the polls, and stand. My rear end stands more chance of being elected than as Prime Minister. Than Kemi Badenoch.
You're absolutely right, though, because I see the likes of Chris Philp and all the rest of it criticising stuff like this, and I think to myself, I don't know how you dare.
How you've got the nerve.
How have you got the brass neck to stand there criticising and lecturing the Labour Party when you lot, this all happened under your watch? The only pushback to that, I imagine if he was sitting next to me now, he would say, yes, Michelle, but currently it's something like 50% up on where it was when the Tories left at the same point last year. That's what I imagine.
Yeah, but then the government would turn around and they would say, we have returned more people. They have returned more people.
Primarily voluntarily. That's what this government... This government will sit here and shout from the rafters that they are returning, deporting 30,000 people. The bit that they won't actually shout from the rafters about is that the vast majority of those people return voluntarily, often paid for by the taxpayer.
And Suella Braverman, of course, who's sounding like all sweetness and light, and of course is the MP for Waterlooville, she was Home Secretary, I seem to remember.
She was briefly, yes.
But she would argue that she was very against a lot of this stuff that was going on, and that's why she ceased to be.
OK, we can talk about this until we're blue in the face. Actually, there's 25,000 come so far this year, so we say it's 50,000 this year, and with Starmer playing the legal card or not prepared to go to war with France, which is probably what it would take, we're going to have another 200,000. So there'll be more Waterloovilles all over the country. What are we going to do? Are we actually going to do anything?
Well, where are we going to put these people? Because, the problem is, and the previous government failed to address it, there are...
OK, well, let's talk about today. What are we going to do going forward on this? Because, and so we'll probably have this debate every Thursday, me, you, Michelle, for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
What is going to happen? What will happen to the country? Where will the tension be? Will something suddenly happen? There will be some kind of rape or some attack on somebody, and suddenly the whole country will ignite. Do you think Starmer, when he's forced against the wall, he's not a man of strength, as we've seen with Palestine, right? So he's not going to go against the flow. I am fearful that one day, and so in an odd way, so I agree with both Rayner and Farage. We appear to be on the cusp of some kind of social breakdown of some kind. Now, that cusp may never happen, but we can't just carry on saying it's perfectly all right to bring in 4,000 people every day, every week, every month.
Well, I can